And so Will has already given some Zoom instructions and housekeeping, and we call this meeting to order of the Becoming Beloved Community network for the province 1 of the Episcopal Church. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James McKim, and I am the, I guess you could say, facilitator of this network, and I serve from the province to the Executive Council Committee on Antiracism and Racial Reconciliation as a provincial representative, and I also chair that interim body of the church. So I have the honor and privilege to work with Will to put together these conversations that we have, and to share our experiences in this work of racial reconciliation, and being that, as the presiding bishop says, the Jesus movement here in Province 1. So we'd love to start this gathering with an opening prayer, and we have the fabulous, well, she's on screen, there she is, Gregory Kemp, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Let us pray. And today we're going to pray from a prayer by the Right Reverend Stephen Charleston. Let us pray. Let me not look away, O God, from any truth I should see. Even if it is difficult, let me face the reality in which I live. I do not want to live inside a corseted dream, imagining I am the one who is always right, or believing only what I want to hear. Help me to see the world through other eyes, to listen to voices distant and different, to educate myself to the feelings of those with whom I think I have nothing in common. Break the shell of my indifference, draw me out of my prejudices, and show me your wide variety. Let me not look away. All this I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So as you can see in the agenda that Will put into the chat, we thought for this gathering we'd have a bit of conversation around reparations and talk about what it means, and a bit about what we are doing in our various dioceses and parishes with respect to reparations. And then we wanted to just have an open update on what's going on across the province, and I thought I would share a bit about the resolutions that are being put forth for General Convention next year around reparations. The Executive Council Committee on Antiracism and Racial Reconciliation, or ECAR as we're called for short, have put forth a number of resolutions this year, and I wanted to share those with you so you had a sense of what's going on in the greater national church. And then we can go around and hear what's going on across the province. And then wanted to talk a bit about what's next time we meet. What would we like to discuss? What would be helpful to us in doing this work going forward? So you can see we've got a packed agenda. So I think we can just kind of dive into that first topic around conversation, and which I see is kind of getting us on the same page as to exactly what is reparations. You know, we use that term, but do we really kind of talk through what it means? And also from our church's perspective, what does that mean? So I've actually put together a few slides that I've been using as I've been going around the church talking about reparations, but I want this really to be kind of a catalyst for our discussion about what is reparations and how do we see it here in Province 1. So let me just share my screen very quickly, and I'll just run through a couple of slides to set context, and then open up for discussion. Can folks see my screen? All right, so y'all, has anybody seen this picture before, the 40 acres and a mule picture? Yeah, it's a great a picture that's used frequently to introduce the whole discussion of reparations. But this is really in the context of becoming beloved community, right? So what are reparations? If you look at the definition that comes from NCOBRA, and hopefully you're all familiar with NCOBRA. Has anyone not heard of NCOBRA before? So NCOBRA is the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparation in America. And it's an organization that sole focus is reparations across the United States. So this is their definition of reparations: the process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people injured because of their group identity and in violation of their fundamental human rights and governments, corporations, institutions, and families. So a very broad definition, which I think we're sometimes very much challenged to figure out how we manifest. Right? And so I've run across this graphic from the Public International Law and Policy Group. And they talk about reparations having 5 core elements, starting with restitution or return of what was stolen. And you can harken back to the definition of repairing the injury, rehabilitation of all parties involved, some kind of compensation, and the compensation piece is what people most think of when they think of reparations, and compensation from the perspective not just of money. Compensation can be many things. Satisfaction, the notion that the injured have to be satisfied with the return and the compensation. And then the guarantee of non-repeat, because we don't want the injury to happen again. So, as we in ECAR and discussions around the greater church are thinking about how does reparations manifest itself, this is the framework that we're thinking about, which leads to some very interesting questions. Questions like the difference between equality and equity. Do we need to have inequality or inequality to achieve equality? Because we're fixing injury. Who's receiving this justice? Is it all people of color? Is it all African Americans? All people of African American descent? Is it people who have whose families have been in the United States for generations? Is it immigrants who just come into the country but who are from the Congo or those nations that have recently been war torn? Who receives this justice is a big question. And then who dispenses the justice? Is it just the government? Is it the government and institutions that are nonprofit? Is it public institutions, public organizations, private organizations? Who dispenses this justice? And I do this talk in New Hampshire. So in the New Hampshire context, but in your state or a city context, is it the city who dispenses this justice? Is it the state? Is it where does this justice come from? So a number of questions that come up as we're trying to grapple with this context of what exactly is reparations. Right? So I want to kind of stop there. There's some examples of what's going on around reparations. The South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Vermont Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Georgetown University has done some excellent work in this space. The city of Asheville has done some excellent work in this space. The Diocese of Maryland has committed $1 million towards reparations. VTS has committed $1.7 million. The Dioceses of New York and Long Island have committed $1.5 million and as a task force studying the issue. The Diocese of Georgia is is talking around a 3% of its unrestricted endowment for a Center for Racial Reconciliation. So there are a number of examples of what's going on around the church to implement reparations that I just wanted to kind of highlight as we go along. And also, I think about this at the 3 levels of discrimination: at the individual or interpersonal level, at the group level with best practices and policies and procedures, and at the systemic level when we talk about laws that codify behavior and our sectors of society, from the wealth sector, the media sector, the housing sector, the criminal justice sector, the education sector. We need to consider all of these as we think about what is reparations and how do we make it happen. And then the context, of course, for the church, for us, is becoming beloved community. And so we talk about and think about the guide that we've produced around racial reconciliation, the guide for training, defining what everyone needs to know in the church to do this work of racial reconciliation that leads to healing, truth, and justice. And I'm hoping that this graphic is very familiar to everyone on this call. If it's not, then we want to give you links to read up on it and become extremely familiar with it, because it is the framework that the church uses for becoming beloved community that leads to reparations. So I'm going to stop here, and I'd love to hear, what are you thinking reparations is, and how are you grappling with it? And any questions you have on any of the slides, I'm happy to answer them at this time. But I wanted just to set some context for a discussion about what is reparations to us here in Province 1. Anybody? Is this making any sense?
I can start. I don't know if I can claim it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Your video is a little choppy, but we can hear you.
Okay. I may turn my video, and maybe it'd be better. So my name is Arrington Chambliss, and I'm with Episcopal City Mission. And thank you. I mean, your comprehensive overview is really powerful, and right, it's what we resonate with, and the NCOBRA definition we use at Episcopal City Mission, as well as the UN definition, and I can drop that in at some point. So I think it's a great comprehensive guide. We also add a dimension which is implicit in all of this, which is the spiritual dimension of the healing. I mean, healing implies spiritual, well, all of them. Truth implies spiritual, justice implies spiritual. And then I found a framework just more personally useful from I'm sure y'all know of it already, that reparations, a Christian call to repentance. I'll put it in the chat. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah. Which is like repairing the truth, repairing power, and repairing wealth. So we're looking not only at our history as an organization and also organizing around reparations with parishes to support them, but also what is our relationship to who makes decisions within our organization, and who's in the seat of making the decision about how reparations will unfold. And then, of course, the wealth. So that's just all I would add, but thank you. It's really a powerful beginning.
Others, Bishop Doug.
Yeah, again, great presentation. In our diocese, we're calling it atonement rather than reparations. And it's only because I've heard from some, significant people in the movement that says that reparations is really what the federal government should be doing in terms of, trillions of dollars in terms of, unpaid labor through the years. And the other things that we do are good, they're important, but they're not reparations. So I would love to hear your point on that. So at the moment we're calling it atonement because we're not sure exactly what we're going to do, but it's certainly not on the scale of the federal government, that's for sure. And atonement is a statement, a theological statement of reconciliation. It's also a statement of at one-ment, so I'd love to get your reflection on that.
So this is really interesting, and it's actually why, and I'll put the slide back up. It's why I have this slide that speaks to there it is, the pie slide, I like to call it sometimes. This slide that defines reparation as more than just the compensation piece, which the federal government, I think, and many people focus on just the money piece, which is the compensation. And it's really, from my perspective, about all of these components. And maybe atonement's the right word to use from a spiritual perspective. I don't know. Whatever way, I think that we get across the notion that it's more than just money. That is, I think we in the church are uniquely equipped to get that point across, that it's more than just the money. It's more than just compensation in the traditional sense. Others, curious to hear what others think about this. Betty?
One concept that sort of goes along with this, if people are familiar with the 12-step program, it's making amends, which really I see as including all of these things that you've got on this slide. It's just another way of thinking about it. I mean, I like the term reparations, but another way of sort of sometimes explaining it is, for people familiar with 12 steps, is it's making amends, which is you got to figure out what you did and then, repair it as much as you can.
So I'm curious, Betty, does that amends, those 12 steps include the guarantee of non-repeat?
It's sort of, I think it's supposed to, because there is supposed to be an element of healing of the relationship where possible. Anyway, it's just, it's not really quite the same, but it has some of the same elements.
Others, what are others thinking about this model and what we've just been talking about? Neil, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, how do you guarantee that it won't happen again? I mean, are you talking about passing laws, or it just seems so unpredictable to me.
Well, what do people think? Betty, your hand up.
I guess one thing is that certainly working to repair systems is a way that can help, help guarantee the non-repeat. In other words, right now, our racism is so ingrained in all of our both political and even our religious systems of governance because of like who has power and how that power gets used. So you gotta think of not just doing a little bit here, but thinking of the broader systems and what underlies that and how can those be changed.
Put that picture up. Roberta, your hand is up.
Yes, I agree with everyone. The idea of, especially in this climate, political climate, of trying to promise that this won't happen again is really hard to buy, because I don't think people are ready for this generation, or maybe the next couple of generations, to really buy into this program. This hatred is taught, and it's hard to, you can't make laws to get rid of it. You have to be taught to love and taught to hate. So I don't see this happening anytime soon, unless somebody knows some secrets about how things are going to be done. I wish they'd share.
Right. So one of the interesting components that comes up in these kinds of discussions around ensuring that even before it's the promise of not happening again, ensuring that the healing that the process of healing is taking place, is this notion of accountability. Where's the accountability in this whole puzzle, in this whole process? And in some cases, having what's referred to as an accountability partner can help with that notion of guarantee, because frequently we don't even know when we're offending someone or how we're making progress towards something, and somebody other than us has to say, you know what you just did, you might want to think about. So engaging with an accountability partner may be a way to think about how do we kind of guarantee or help make more likely that we're not going to repeat the offense. Thoughts about that? Does that make sense? Does that help, Neil?
Oh, what's an engaging, or sorry, an accountability partner then? What is that, an entity or a person, or?
Yes.
Let
me give you an example. NCOBRA is an organization that is dedicated to reparations. Perhaps a church could contact NCOBRA, or some people know that I'm president of the Manchester branch of the NAACP. The NAACP, our branch, acts as an accountability partner for organizations in our area. So perhaps in your diocese, you make a connection with the NAACP in the branch in your group and ask them to be your accountability partner. There are BLM groups around the country. I'm sure there are BLM groups in your areas. Ask them to be an accountability partner. Arrington.
But it's not just groups, but people, individuals.
Correct.
That have to summon up the courage and speak as kindly as possible about someone's misgivings, about them about them saying things that could be hurtful.
Arrington, you had your hand up.
Sorry, I may go inside if this is too loud. We in Massachusetts, we're working with a Interfaith Reparations Coalition, and that coalition is with an organization called the Truth Telling Project and the Grassroots Reparations Campaign. I'll also put the link. And they're organizing reparations Sabbaths in December. So they're a Black-led organization, and that is another example of a potential accountability partner in the work.
Excellent thoughts. So I want to be cognizant a little bit of our time here. Although this is I think a really good discussion. I think we've got a little more time to continue this for a little bit longer. Other thoughts? We've got some people who've been just sitting, and I know we've got some people who've just joined. I think Dwayne, you just joined us, so you didn't quite get the context and the little set of slides, the framework for all this. We're talking through the framework of reparations that shows that it's more than just compensation. And we probably just heard some of the discussion about how do we get to the point of guaranteeing of non-repeat of the injury, right? So any other thoughts from folks? I know some people have just been listening. I want to give folks who've just been listening the opportunity to also just share your thoughts about what the slides you've seen, the discussion we've just had. Is this resonating with you? Are there things going on in your diocese that this might help with? Or maybe even where in what we've been talking about, where do you see, and this will lead to our next section here, what are the challenges? Where's the, and let me ask that question. Where do you see the challenges and the pushback?
I can go. So hello everyone. I'm sorry I'm late. Dwayne Keys. I attend Church of the Redeemer in Providence, Rhode Island. So we're part of the Rhode Island Diocese. I also have been leading our parish's racial reconciliation work since 2019. So there's been a number of projects that we've been leading on, and the most recent one that we're just kicked off is our oral history project on the history of the Black Episcopal Church, Church of the Savior, which was closed back in the 1950s as a part of urban renewal in Providence. So telling that history, there's a number of Black Episcopal parish members from that parish who have stories to tell about their experience. And we're talking about how it impacts today. One of the things that we are wanting to have as part of those questions is from those parish members, what does reconciliation or amends or reparations, if you will, looks to them? I think part of the challenge is that we're feeling as though we have to do something. And then one of the things we talked about is before we take an action, let's ask the people who were harmed, what does healing and reconciliation look to them? So that's a great start that we've been focusing on. That's something that we've been moving forward in terms of supporting our diocese with some suggestions and activities. So we have the the Center for Reconciliation that I've been asked to join as the working group. And so I think one of the challenges I'm seeing is some folks may not know how to go about this work. How do you go about reconciliation? How do you go about amends, healing, reparations? And so I think because there's a concern about repeating past harms of let's just decide what to do, I'm seeing some folks who are in the spot of let's hold off on doing anything until we somehow can find what we think is the right way to go about it. So that's what I'm seeing the challenges, at least from my observation here.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I know the Diocese of Vermont is also, Vermont as a state has established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a truth-telling commission, to your point, to tell the stories and to talk about what does reparation look like in Vermont. In Vermont, it's what does it look like in Vermont, which may be different than what it looks like in Rhode Island or Massachusetts or Connecticut. I think I saw. Go ahead.
I was going to say, luckily, we do have a blueprint. We had the Providence Municipal Reparations Commission, which I was a member of, that did work in 2022 about 10 million of ARPA funds. How can we get that as a ways of addressing past harms? So there's some framework, but more work to be done. That's all.
Right. Great. Thank you, Dwayne. Rowena, I think I saw your hand up at some point.
Yes, my hand is up. I'm at a friend's house for dinner, so I have to keep exiting to come on camera and not disturb everybody else who's here. I'm the Reverend Rowena Thompson. I'm the rector of Grace Episcopal Church in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm also a member of our Racial Healing, Justice, and Reconciliation Ministry Network and our task force on racism in the Title IV process, and as well as our reparations task force in the Episcopal Church in Connecticut. And what we've done is we've taken perhaps the route of a number of things that have been already mentioned here in our discussion today. We first had a season of racial healing, justice, and reconciliation where we looked at who we were, how did we become who we are, what does our history say about us, where did we get our funds, or those kinds of things. And from that, we decided that in 2020, we had an all-encompassing resolution that was passed at our convention that called for a canon for racial advocacy, justice, reconciliation. And so we began a program where there was different kinds of anti-racism training that covered the various groups across our diocese, from folks who wanted to learn to folks who felt we were opening a can of worms and this stuff had all been resolved 50 years ago. And so diverse types of training and ways for people to sit at the table. But also, while all of that is happening, we're also looking at what are the stories in our parishes? How were our parishes founded? Who founded them? Where did the money come from? For the colonial type parishes, that you can actually look at their history and look at the census data and look at their clergy and who among those clergy had enslaved folks, as well as the leading businessmen of the time and who among them were enslavers, as well as looking at how we got our money that founded parishes that came later, that came post emancipation, right? In terms of, the Eli Whitneys and the insurance companies that insured the boats and the business that was happening in the South. And so we're still doing that work. Additionally, we're gearing up now to look at how do we get folks to tell their stories, tell the truth of what has happened, what's been happening, and the systems that we live in that further continues oppression in the church, and how do we get to the bottom of those, and where does bias set in, and what tools do we need to be able to retrain ourselves, because we're all complicit, right? And so that's where we are, and we have an exciting resolution that we're hoping that's going to be passed at convention this year, that will ask for money not only to look at where diocesan funds have come from, but also hopefully funds set aside to look at, say, 4 or 5 of our colonial parishes who have large endowments, and where those funds came from, and have it done by have forensic auditors come in to take a look at that, as well as looking at possibly $2.5 million from the unrestricted funds of the Missionary Society in our diocese, set aside for reparations, and then look at who would be in charge, what would be the criteria, and all of that, because we're beginning to watch as other dioceses have been setting up reparations funds. And so we have the benefit of seeing where others have fallen short, where certain things weren't put in place before. So we're moving slowly, while at the same time, lots of education is happening and going on in our diocese, so that folks could understand why this is important, why this is a Christian call and not a political, so to speak, movement to make folks feel bad, but in essence, to truly repair the breach. So that's a little bit about what's happening in Connecticut right now. And it's, you know, we're trying to do something that has, I guess, for lack of a better word, stickability, that becomes a part of who we are. And so it means that our hands are in all sorts of places doing a lot of work simultaneously. So hopefully that was helpful.
Great, thank you for that. And I think I'm resonating with the notion of the resolution to put forth some thoughtful research and planning for how to move this forward, learning from what has been done in the past. We in New Hampshire have a resolution coming forth for our upcoming diocesan convention, which will establish a task force and a coordinator, a paid coordinator to drive day to day. And I was one who put this forward because I recognize that this work, and this is, I do work in the public space, the secular space on DEI as well. There needs to be someone to drive this day in and day out. And many of our churches have not had that, and our dioceses have not had that. So we're putting money into having a person hired to drive this task force and gathering, figuring out how we're going to gather the stories, as folks have said, and how we're going to help the parishes to do this work at the parish level, looking at histories and creating plans using some of the resources. And I hope you all are aware of the resources that are available from the church on the Becoming Beloved Community page. The Sacred Ground effort, which Betty Lane is leading our New Hampshire and Maine series of New Hampshire of Sacred Ground this year. The Becoming Beloved Community Where You Are materials, which I think are fabulous and very much underutilized, that helps to get to the parish level of what are we going to do as a parish now that we have this little bit more knowledge of the past, but what's our plan as a parish, with some nice questionnaires and guides for helping develop a plan for each parish. So hopefully you all are aware of those resources and are sharing those resources with others. Other thoughts on pushback. I think this is a point that we heard at our last meeting that people wanted to talk about, the pushback. And let me just quickly share a little framework that might also engender some more discussion on this. This actually comes from Gartner Group, but it's really at the individual level. Pushback can come in at the interpersonal level in three ways. Either it's the denial that there isn't a problem. There's derailing. What about other problems? This problem of reparations and discrimination is not as important as the other problems that we face. Or the disengagement pushback. This is not my problem. I didn't create it. It's not my problem to solve. So wondering if any of you are experiencing these or others, and how are you dealing with this pushback that we hear?
Hello, everybody. Edwin here. Is it okay if I jump in?
Go ahead, Edwin. Welcome.
Amen. Thank you. I thank everybody. Edwin Johnson, Diomass Episcopal City Mission, where we work with the whole Commonwealth, which is great. And then in terms of the pushback, I love this triangle here. And this isn't my problem is something that I hear from communities. And so just for context, I am preaching at different congregations every Sunday. I'm going around and engaging different communities, trying to get them into this work. And that this isn't my problem oftentimes comes in a sense of communities saying, well, we're all white here, or, people talking as saying that, okay, well, because of, the church I just preached at today was founded in the 50s, building built in the 60s. They're all white people. There's a lot of communities saying because of their demographics, because of who they are, that, even if they agree that it is a problem, they feel like they aren't positioned to do anything about it, or, in a place where they really should, where it's their imperative. And so that's some pushback that I hear from these communities quite a bit. My primary sort of response to that has generally kind of gone in two ways. One is just talking about how intertwined these issues are, because, everywhere there are issues around race and need for reparations, there are generally issues around poverty. And I think connecting those has been a helpful, and then also, panning back enough for people to see actually how yoked they are to communities for which this is a real big piece. And so I found that that's actually been helpful, and that people have been open when I've done that. And then, the what about other problems? Pretty much my entire life as a Black person in this church, I've gotten used to people retorting that we shouldn't focus on this because you should focus on the climate. I adore the climate, and I think it's a real issue, and it's actually really intertwined. And I think that can be a challenging one to kind of work with. And I think the place that I found success has been to find the places where there are overlap, and thankfully or not thankfully rather, because there are issues, there tend to be plenty of them. So yeah, just a couple of thoughts from me on that.
Great, thanks, Edwin. Great to hear. Carol, I see you have a hand up.
Yes, I do. I'm from Keene, and we have the great legacy of being the church that Jonathan Daniels came from, and yet we are not a congregation that even had enough conversation to have any pushback. I mean, I think that in our area there's more interest in communicating about the indigenous people from our area, but in some ways, and yes, I think that's important for us to do. But I also think in some ways that is it's a convenient cop-out to not look at racial disparity. In Keene, any people of color are either connected with our college or are people that are homeless. And that's certainly not something people are happy to embrace, although we've done a lot directly with those people who are homeless.
Right, thank you, Carol. Yep, Keene is an interesting place, right on the border of pretty much with Vermont, and I know Derek is
Yes.
doing his best to drive some of this work, and yeah, others pushback. What are you experiencing, and do you have anything to share that may work, that you've seen work to address that pushback? Lynn.
Hi, I'm also from the Diocese of Eastern Massachusetts, and I'm the registrar historiographer of our diocese. So I do have, I would go along with Edwin's comments about, I hear a lot of that, it didn't happen here, we don't do it, or something else is going on. But I've tried to think about where they're coming from, where the folks who are coming back with that are coming from. And because I generally deal with the history of our parishes, I see folks very connected to their history and to their history, which is the history in their head, and not this revisited history, this more open history. And it's very difficult, I believe, for them to look at their ancestors or their predecessors as having done anything wrong. They're very careful to bring out every wonderful thing they've done, but never anything that's wrong. And it's very difficult. I mean, we have trained ourselves to look at what a wonderful church we have and how wonderful our parish is and how wonderful our history is. And now all of a sudden it's as if we're telling the family secret. And I think that it's very difficult. And I think to some extent, the pushback is coming from that. And I did like the bishop's comment about saying that atonement is sort of the at-one-ness, that we're one with all of these. We own all of our failures and we own all of our successes. But I don't know how you get that across to folks so that they'll accept it. So that's my experience anyway.
Thank you, Lynn. Becky, see your hand is up.
Yeah, Lynn, thanks for speaking about this. So I had just finished a report. Well, let me start by saying that my parish was founded in approximately 1902 is when the building was built. And I just finished the research report where I looked at all the founders and what I'm calling the benefactors, who are actually the people who have been commemorated on stained glass in our church. And the history that I did was, I'm not a historiographer, nor am I a genealogist, but I went to ancestry.com and I tracked the family trees for all of those people, the founders and benefactors. And then I tried to figure out, okay, how far can I go with this in terms of getting wills or in terms of getting probate information to figure out where did this money come from that started the church. That's almost impossible to do unless you're really going to be traveling all over to look for some of that information. And at the time, I didn't have time to do that. However, what I did find was that there are a lot, you could figure out what the occupations were for many of these people. And if they were executives or if they in, say, industry. And let's talk about maybe cotton mills or woolen mills or paper mills. Well, where did that cotton come from at the time that they were alive? Well, it probably came from the South. And so they benefited as executives in their cotton mill from cotton being exported from the South that was probably grown and cultivated through slavery. So that is one way that I'm thinking about approaching the parish, is that maybe money didn't actually transfer, or maybe some of our founders and benefactors did not own people, but they earned their money through that process of slavery. And there's lots of ways of thinking about it. We had some people who were maybe they were ship captains. So I looked through the voyages, slave voyages database to see, are there names there? Now, I did not look at all of the aunts and uncles, which may be important as well. And the project gets huge really fast. So, I think it's important to not just try and connect the money. If you have a tangible way of doing that you can actually say this amount of money was transferred that many generations to the founders. But certainly they benefited from it. So that's kind of the approach that I'm trying to start thinking about relative to my parish and reparations, of drawing some connections, even if I can't get monetary specifics.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it goes along the lines of investigating the history of the parish, right? And I say, back to the framework and thinking about repairing injury, right? There's an injury there that was done that is has repercussions is still causing injury today. And I think somebody earlier mentioned, I think Dwayne might have been you, that this notion of injury is connected with poverty, right? And why is there poverty? Why are people of color more poor? Well, it's because of the history that's happened in the parishes. So another way to connect the past with the present for folks who push back that I didn't cause this problem. Well, it still exists. Arrington.
Thanks. Sorry. Before the resolution and the Diomass was passed, I was a part of a reparation, and after I was part of a reparations community of practice, which was like Becky and Lynn were saying, were groups of people from Episcopal parishes who were beginning their history study. And that's we're no longer meeting, but there's a website where you can watch how people were going about doing their history. And I can share it. It's video recordings of the presentations. And then there was also a presentation by Dr. Sandy Darity and Dr. Kirsten Mullins, who are reparations scholars at Duke University. So there's some good resources there, just as for folks that are beginning to do the work through the path of studying of history. So I can share that website as well.
Yeah, so there's so many great resources and great tips being shared here. I think this is the kind of thing this is kind of for us to capture this and put it on a Province One page. I personally would love to have, and I'm not sure how we get this, but I'd love to have a document or pages that describe what's going on in each diocese with contact information, so that as we in New Hampshire look at, well, we've got a resolution this year, but what are we doing next year? We can look on that page and say, well, Connecticut's doing this great stuff, or actually we can point to our reparations coordinator, who we hope will have hired, say, look at that page, see what it is that Connecticut's doing that we should be bringing into New Hampshire, right? Because it's great to share this here, but it's going in the ether. So if we can capture that information on our provincial site and somehow keep it up to date too with what's going on, or at least links to pages. Do your dioceses have pages where you're capturing what's going on with reparations that we can just point to? Or is there a place where there are report outs going on of what's going on in your diocese? Would that be helpful for us to put something like that together at the provincial level, perhaps? Do you think? I see a few nods and a thumbs up, a couple of thumbs up. Okay. So that's
definitely something I can do with especially the more support from gatherings like this, and also from Episcopalians who are willing to sort of report in and share these things with me. I think the Province One website is really there to serve the needs of Episcopalians across New England.
excellent. Any more thoughts on pushback before we move to the next topic and conversation? Pushback or how to address it? Well, seeing none, so the next question we had in mind was to discuss, in doing this work, right? How does this work happen in a landscape where we're all burnt out? We've all been doing this work, we're all busy. How does this work happen in this landscape of burnout? Bishop Doug.
Well, what I found that works is that you find people who are passionate about it and have them lead the way. I mean, that's been true with climate things. You know, we're blessed with Margaret Bullock Jonas, and she's you know, a champion of caring for God's creation, and that's really made a big difference in our diocese. Her passion has led the way, and so I feel like I've got some people that are really passionate about this work, and that, you know, we've got a ways to go. We have our first resolution about this is this coming October, about studying it and doing things like that. But I've got people who are passionate about it that will drive it.
All right. So getting people who are passionate about it, that can drive the work. Other thoughts about how does this work happen in a landscape where people are burned out? Edwin.
Yeah, I would just add on what His Grace mentioned and say, you know, find the people who are passionate about it, and then find ways to connect them with each other. You know, traveling from congregation to congregation, I get the pleasure of meeting that person who's been beating the drum and holding faithfully for a long time and is exhausted and is alone. And I think what I've learned is that rather than asking them to do something else, the best thing I can do is say, hey, there's someone just like you in this other congregation that I know. Why don't y'all grab coffee? Why don't you figure that out? And I think just from that sacred community, it's where folks can begin to kind of recharge each other's batteries, because it's the isolation of this work that I think can often be the hardest piece. There's also the other piece of it. I mean, so much of this work has been really carried by especially persons of color, especially women of color, for free forever, like literally forever, like pre-Jesus, I mean, basically. But I mean, I'm dead serious though. And so another piece of it is, you know, figuring out, okay, so how do we actually compensate people for what they're doing? And, you know, how do we, you know, honor their time and everything like that? I mean, does that prevent someone from being burnt out? No, I mean, if someone's burnt out, that's going to be burnt out. And I think creating paths where we're actually caring for and compensating people, so we're not creating, you know, futures of people who are burnt out, not having received anything, I think is also really important.
Excellent point. And the whole notion of self-care, and helping others to care for themselves. I talked before about accountability partners. Well, there's accountability in doing the work and accountability in being good to yourself. Right? We who are passionate about this work, we can get burned out without realizing it. Someone else, though, could see that we're reaching that burnout stage, or remind us, you know, or ask us, are you taking Sunday off to recharge your own batteries? I see you're passionate about this, but I'm a little worried about you burning out. Right? We need those people around us to hold us accountable and keep us safe too. Other thoughts about doing this work in a landscape of burnout?
I can just jump in. As a white leader, I feel like my work within the context of reparations is to see it as a deep path of following Jesus to my own liberation in deep partnership with my siblings of color, and that it's not a guilt-ridden burden. It's just, you know, it's like the young lawyer. It's the thing that by unburdening, you know, like shifting power, relinquishing more resource, I'm going to get more free. And believing that in the core of my soul gives me new life, versus like, oh my God, it's another justice issue. It's another thing we have to do. Oh Lord, have mercy, God, burden. It's a shift in thinking around, this is the way that, I think you said it earlier, James, around like, we're all linked in here. It's both like, but that I'm going to get free through this. And I think if we can talk more about that, I mean, I'm thinking mostly of my white people and congregations. here. There's something in that then gives me passion around like, yeah, that. So I don't know. I'd love to learn what other people have figured out.
Others, thoughts there? So I will chime in here. Bishop Hirschfeld wrote a book. It's been 3 or 4 years ago, where he talks about fear and shame. And when I wrote my book, I realized I wanted to use that. I wanted to incorporate that into my book around diversity and organizational performance. And Arlington, what you just said resonated with me, because what I'm thinking about with helping white people connect this work to their own liberation is that because of the way, there's this great video that the New York Times put out about 3 years ago called Peanut Butter and Jelly Racism. Did anybody see that video? It describes the notion that our brains are associative. Our brains operate on associations, not on data really, but on associations. So whenever I say peanut butter, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? At least in the United States, it's jelly, right? Now, elsewhere, there's another association that's been made, but for us, it's been ingrained in us that peanut butter and jelly go together. Similarly to that, what's been ingrained in us is that Black men are dangerous. That's an association, right? So because of that association, whenever we see a Black man, whenever a white person sees a Black man, and even when Black people, when I see a Black man dressed in a certain way, I fear. I say, oh, that person's dangerous. I better watch out. So we're living in this world of fear because of that association that has been ingrained in us. And we're also ashamed that we have that fear. So by dealing with this issue, we're addressing that fear and shame we feel. And when we address that fear and shame, we're liberating ourselves. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, I'd love to hear where it doesn't make sense, because I tell that story and it seems to resonate, but I always want to make that story better. But does that make sense to folks? I see Arlington, it seems to make sense. Yeah. All right. So I think any last thoughts here before on the reparations piece before we shift to, and I guess we're sort of somewhat continuing, but what's going on in your diocese around reparations? And I know Rowena's shared what's really going on in Connecticut. Dwayne's shared a bit of what's going on in Rhode Island. We've shared a little bit of what's going on in Massachusetts, and I've tried to share a little bit of what's going on in New Hampshire. But anything else folks want to share about what's going on in your diocese? And then I'll share a bit what's going on at the national level with the resolutions that ECAR has put forth for next general convention. Betty.
I can give just a little bit more about what the Diocese of New Hampshire has done. I believe it was 2019, we adopted a resolution on that we were going to do reparations and ask the parishes to study. And then we also, a year later, we looked to see, and we also provided a way for people to be involved in and getting some information about things like sacred ground and building the bridge and several other activities. And then we actually gathered up what people had done and reported that. And we got like 80% of the congregations had done something. And now, of course, as you mentioned earlier, we're now going to this resolution where we're asking the diocese to put some money into creating this position that will lead a group that will plan both for the diocese and for parishes. Okay, how do we do that? And there is a book that called, you can help me with the title, How something about how the churches plan to do reparations. And anyway, so that's just a little more details on what's happening in New Hampshire, and please fill in anything else.
Bishop Doug. You're on mute, Bishop Doug.
We've got a resolution this October 28th. And so our big effort right now is to educate people to that so that they're not surprised. So we've met with our trustees. We have Stephanie Spellers who's going to do a Zoom workshop for us. We've got information going out through the deaneries. And so that our big thing is not to surprise people, because it's that discussion really hasn't happened before.
Okay. Anything else from the other dioceses? I'm sorry we don't have Vermont here, or Maine.
So a little bit earlier, my colleague Arrington mentioned the Reparations Sabbath that we have going on here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Just want to further plug that and hope that congregations interested in hosting an event and getting involved can go ahead and do so, and be in touch with us if you'd like to do it. Related to this also, and at Episcopal City Mission, we are having our annual meeting on the 14th of October. And as with everything that we do, at the heart of it are our three big approaches to the racial wealth gap. One of which will receive a lot of attention, is reparations as well. And so, yes, anybody, this is, obviously it's Massachusetts focus, and anyone who would love to come down and be a part, you can show up to the cathedral or also Zoom in online to be with us. And so that's something that I'd love to put on people's radars if it's not already.
And certainly that's something we'd want to get in the Province One newsletter. If you haven't already shared that with Will, he can add that.
Thank you.
I don't know everything that Maine is doing, but I do know that they, along with Vermont and New Hampshire, are organizing groups, circles for sacred ground. And also they're out of Brunswick. There's a lot of work both in the parish and in the community. And then that person they have a staff person for sacred ground. Also, they've got a collaboration with, I believe, the Diocese of someplace in the South. Maybe it's Alabama or someplace. So there's a real focus on sacred ground for education in the Diocese of Maine. And I'm sure that they're doing some other things, but that's the part I know about.
Great. Anything else big going on in your diocese that we should know about and we'd want to make sure Will has on the Province One newsletter list? All right, then let me just quickly share. Oh, I had it in the Word document. That's why. Resolutions that ECAR has put forth for general convention. Share my screen. There we go. I just put this together really quickly. I'll read this because I know I can make this a little larger. So this first resolution, and I apologize, these are slightly different sizes. I didn't have time to put them into one document. This is actually the outline version of the Word document that we have that has all of our resolutions. I guess I'll just at a high level say that we've been really concerned about something we've been talking about during this meeting, and that is accountability. We have in our canon that anyone going through the ordination process should have taken anti-racism training. That has been part of the canon for a number of years. We have a concern that that is not sufficient. It's also outdated. So we've put forth some resolutions to try to address that, and also the notion that there have been general convention resolutions around any leaders in the church, be they lay or ordained, having taken anti-racism training, and those have not been truly fulfilled church-wide. So again, this notion of accountability is something that we've been very concerned about, and we're putting forth a few resolutions to try to address those two concerns. So the first resolution is around, actually, let me just look at this for a minute. We actually incorporated the first resolution in a different resolution. So this first resolution is establishing a certification framework. And this is going to be put forth by the task force on reimagining social justice within the church. So we're working in conjunction with them on this resolution. And the notion is that it's one thing to take training, but it's another thing to actually know what that training has imparted and be able to use that training. So we, as ECAR 2 conventions ago, put forth what we call the framework for anti-racism and racial reconciliation training. It's a definition of what we believe anyone doing this work in the church should know. From the history of this church to definitions of racism, white supremacy, and all those other definitions, and also what skills we think people should have. And we created a rubric that describes an awareness level of knowledge and skill, a competency-based level of knowledge and skill, and a mastery-based level of knowledge and skill. So that's all been defined. But we need to make sure that people have at least that awareness level, if not that competency level. And so the certification process we identified is a way to help make sure that people have at least that awareness level, if not the competency level of training. So that's what that resolution is about. The second resolution that we are passing is more of a memorial resolution, is what it's called. And we're lifting up the work of the Equal Justice Initiative and recommending that parishes connect with that initiative and place plaques. If you know what that initiative is, it's placing plaques and placing land markers on places where injustice has actually occurred. So we're lifting up the work of the EJI. The next resolution is to put a focus on recruitment, hiring, appointment, and retention and representation of people of color in the church, and providing some guidance on how parishes, dioceses can increase that representation. Okay? It's one thing to say you want to do it, but as we've talked about here, people don't know how to do that. So we're asking staff to create a guidebook on how to do just that. And so resolution D, you see, is to hire a chief equity officer. The presiding bishop has sort of acted as this chief equity officer, or maybe Canon Spellers has kind of acted as this chief equity officer. But we know that organizations that have a successful engagement around discrimination and around diversity and reconciliation have a person whose job it is every day to drive this. I mentioned that in New Hampshire, this is the resolution that we're putting forth, to have someone at the diocesan level do this work. So at the greater church level, we're putting forth this resolution to have somebody at the church-wide level drive this work day to day. And this one was really because of a concern that the presiding bishop's term is up. And so we're losing our chief cheerleader around equity with his episcopate ending. So we wanted to institutionalize this work, if you will, with having someone appointed to do that work. The next resolution is around ECAR itself. ECAR was brought into existence by a General Convention resolution back in 2009, and it was in existence for a triennia. Well, that first triennia passed, and it was reconstituted for another triennia. And the whole notion of ECAR was it was going to be a temporary entity until the church really built an infrastructure to institutionalize this work. That has still not happened. This work is still not institutionalized in the church. So there is a task force that is looking into that, and we were hopeful that that work would be done before this General Convention, but that work is going much slower than anyone had anticipated. So we're asking that ECAR be reconstituted or brought forth for another triennia, and to continue this work until this institutionalized new entity is established. The resolution F is around translation of at least the reconciliation resources into Spanish. We passed as a church a resolution back in 2018, I think it was, that we would translate all collateral into at least Spanish, and I think we talked about doing in French at least as well. We have not lived into that as a church. Money has not really been allocated to do that. So we're putting forth a resolution to at least to start with a small chunk, to at least start with the racial reconciliation collateral that is available on our website, to translate that into Spanish and put some money behind doing just that as a way to get started. Let's see. So the next one, resolution G, is around seminaries and schools of theological education. We recognize that we're relying heavily on seminaries and schools of theological education to form our church leadership. Yet we know that many of the seminaries and schools of theological education have not done a good job about teaching about racial reconciliation. So we have a resolution that is going to be asking for an investigation of how we as a church, as we look to interact with these other seminaries or schools of theological education and certify them as being schools that we want as an Episcopal Church to work with, to make sure that they are truly teaching racial reconciliation using the concepts that we defined in the framework. Resolution H is about creating some model policies that help to institutionalize this work. So you're all familiar with Safe Church, right? Safe Church has been institutionalized in our church. We all have to go through it. Well, we think racial reconciliation is at that level. It's something we all need to go through. We all need to go through that education, and we need to re-educate ourselves on a regular basis on it. So how Safe Church got to be where it is today is there was a resolution that was passed, and I'm forgetting which year it was passed now. I think it was 2 conventions ago, to create a set of model policies for the church around, and it was really protection of youth and children was the phrase that was used for that. So I looked at that and said, well, we need the same kind of model policies around racial reconciliation. So we put forth a resolution that the church establish a task force to create those model policies that will bring racial reconciliation to that same level of effort in the church as Safe Church. And then the last resolution was to amend the canons to use approved terminology. 2 conventions ago, we passed a general convention resolution to move away from the term anti-racism and move toward the term of, if we can remember what it is, because I want to get it right so you all hear it correctly. Where is it? Let me do this. To all of us. I want to highlight the phrase. Let's go up to the resolution itself. Dismantling racism and achieving racial justice and healing is the phrase that we've approved as a church to use. So this resolution is about reflecting that in our canon, that we as a church have said, this is the language we now want to use. Let us reflect that in our canons as well. So those are the resolutions that we've, as ECAR passed. And I'm happy to entertain any questions about these. These are already put into our Blue Book report. And if you're familiar with the way the church works, each interim body and bishops and diocese gets to propose resolutions through a report mechanism. That's each of us creates a Blue Book report that reports on what we've been doing and includes these resolutions. So these resolutions have been put forth in our Blue Book report and will be considered by the legislative bodies of the church. And Edward's very familiar with the legislative bodies since he actually was co-chair of one of them that took up some of our resolutions. Those will be up for vote at our next general convention. So questions, thoughts, observations about these resolutions? And Neil.
Could you go back to that quote for resolution I just didn't get it.
Sure, let me do this. Let me close outline view and I'll go back to it. What's highlighted there, dismantling racism and achieving racial justice and healing. Other questions, thoughts, observations? Does this feel okay? Does it spark any thoughts?
I do have a question. So with the resolutions, is there any type of analysis or measurement of progress towards the resolution? Because
yes, there is. So one of the mandates of ECAR is to actually track progress against the resolutions of the church, which are around racial reconciliation. So we've been doing that in previous years. I have actually asked our province to share what's going on, each diocese to share with me what's going on, and I've included that in the Blue Book report. The last two conventions, we've actually had a racial justice audit that has taken place, and each diocese should have filled out information in that racial justice audit of what is going on in the diocese around racial reconciliation. So hopefully your diocese, I believe your diocese has filled out that report. It's not as detailed as some of us would like for it to be, but it is a start at gathering this information of how we're doing against our resolutions that we pass as General Convention. And you know, this gathering, this network is a way of kind of tracking how we're doing as well. We've had, we haven't been meeting. We took a bit of a hiatus. This group was meeting for a while. We were meeting about 5 years ago, we were meeting on a monthly basis to have just this kind of discussion. So I'm hoping that we kind of backed off and said, well, maybe once a month is too much. Maybe once a quarter is probably the best we can do. So we'll try to continue that so that we're all sharing what we're all doing across our diocese. I see Roberta has her hand up, and then Carol. Let's stop sharing for a minute.
I would hope that part of the duties of the new expert that they're going to create would be to work with the seminaries in their diocese on their plans to teach and encourage anti-racist work and ideas.
Well, that's precisely why we had the resolution around the seminaries and schools of theological thought, because we did want to put that emphasis on. So, and that's part of the work we expect this person hired as a chief equity officer to perform. Carol.
That is very similar to what the comment I wanted to say, which is that short of writing a curriculum for the seminaries, how are we going to be able to make them accountable, or to know what it is that if they're adequately evaluating our soon-to-be clergy in their ability to deal with racism?
So it's a great question, and this is precisely why we have Resolution A. Let me share my screen again. I wanted to let you all see each other, but I'll go back to my screen. And the question you ask is relevant for anybody in the church. How do we know that anybody in the church, whether they've gone through seminary or school of theological education or not, how do we know that they have the knowledge that we expect them to have to do this work? So that's why we said we need a certification framework with an examination mechanism.
Good.
Right. So we know that people have the knowledge, and you know we thought about creating a curriculum ourselves, and we realized that there are too many variables, too many different perspectives from which we'd have to teach this stuff. And we said, you know what? It's probably not wise for us to try to create a curriculum. And there was a curriculum that was created by the church. Some of you may be familiar with it, Seeing the Face of God in Each Other, that Jane Oason created many years ago. That was informally called the church's teaching on anti-racism, although it wasn't officially a church teaching. But what we said was, and this comes from learning development theory, and I have a learning development background, we don't really care how somebody got the training and the learning and the knowledge that they got. We just care that they got it. So it doesn't matter if they got it from a curriculum that was created by Sewanee or a curriculum that was created by the Iona School. We really don't care about that. What we care is that the person has the knowledge and skills that they need, that we expect them to have to do this work properly. Other questions? Observations? A lot to digest, isn't it?
James.
Yes.
I'm thinking about sort of some of the way that this work both lands on and sort of emerges from work going on in Province 1 in New England. And did you, in a previous conversation, did you mention that the Northern Dioceses are engaging in joint work on these kinds of trainings as dioceses at the moment, or is that sort of a hope for the future?
That is kind of a hope. we aren't doing any official formal work together now, but it's something that we've been discussing because we recognize that Northern New England has fewer people going through the ordination process and needing to do this work from a leadership perspective. And the Northern New England states have been sending candidates to Massachusetts and Connecticut for the training because those dioceses have training going on. So about 4 years ago, the 3 northern states did put forth a training that people going through the ordination process and a few lay leaders as well went through. And we're talking about doing that again. So that's in the discussion path.
Excellent. I want to sort of publicly affirm that that's a thing that Province 1 wants to be involved in supporting in any way we can, and also sort of hold that up as an example of different ways of collaboration between Episcopalians across dioceses that Province 1 has a grant model to be able to support financially. If a little bit of money would help these kinds of projects, we would love to take part in that support. And that can be something as big as a diocesan collaboration or as small as parishes in terms of, materials for study. That's something that, our grants can help support you with.
Right. And just to add on to that, there's the provincial grants, and there's also the church-wide grants, Becoming Beloved Community grants that help to facilitate some of this work, some of the history work that Betsy had to leave, that Betsy was talking about, some of that history, that historical research. You could get a grant to pay someone to do that work. Carol, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I never lowered it.
Okay. All right. So I think this is a good time to shift to our somewhat our last topic. And I'm gonna tweak what we had in mind a little bit. We've done kind of reporting back. We've kind of talked about diocesan convention resolutions coming up. Thinking about next steps for this group. And the question that we had originally was, what do we talk about next time? I'd like to tweak that a little bit. What do you need help with in doing this work? And that, I think, is something we can maybe take back, and maybe that's what we talk about next time. What help do you need in doing this work? You're all in the thick of it. Bishop Doug.
I would love to hear some examples of work that's going on that doesn't involve money, because we're certainly involved in that. But I would and we've had 80 sacred ground groups, so we've got we'd love to see next steps on that. So yeah, so some real examples of healing and reconciliation that's happened that's beyond the financial realm.
Anyone have examples? Examples where dignity is being restored, for example.
Right.
Well, I have some examples from New Hampshire. What we're doing. We're working with the New Hampshire Black Heritage Trail. And we're helping kind of along the lines of the EJI. We're putting up memorials to African Americans who have made a difference in New Hampshire all across the state. That's a physical presence that's restoring the dignity of African Americans. In a place where we talked a little bit before about people thinking that this work is not necessary because of the demographics. Well, New Hampshire, demographically, 87% white with this current census, or 89%, 88.7%. And you don't think of it as a state where there are that many African Americans, but we have many, and we're trying to restore the dignity of people by memorializing them. Betty?
The other thing that we have done is work with some of the indigenous groups in New Hampshire, particularly one group. We helped them make a film about the ecology of one of our waterways near me, actually, but also how it was previously part of the indigenous way of life. And we're also continuing to be on top of legislation related to indigenous folks, and now trying to reach out to some other indigenous groups. So that's some of the concrete things that we've been doing also in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Betty. Harrington.
Edwin might be able to say more than I, but there in Cambridge, Christ Church, Cambridge, a UCC church, and the Harvard chaplaincy are all similar to what you shared, James, are creating a tour, like a tour of the different historical memorialized sites to kind of explore the history in Cambridge particularly, and of churches that were colluding with the slave trade, or either that were enslavers. And then at St. Peter's in Salem, there's a similar study of the history in an intention, Salem, Massachusetts, where there's a lot of tours. St. Peter's, San Pedro, Salem is going to be doing kind of welcoming people in to do the tour, but from the study and from as best they're able, the perspective not of the enslavers, but of the enslaved. And those are two examples. I don't know, Edwin, if you have more about those, but those are two.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add, those are great examples. And I think what I appreciate in both examples is how they've really gone out of their way to connect with, members of the Black communities, and, members connected even more intimately to those histories. And so that's just a critical piece of it. And what's notable about in San Pedro is that they're sort of the predominant portion of their worshiping congregation right now are persons of color from the Dominican Republic. And so I think it's a great example that this work is being carried out not just by, predominantly white communities, but predominantly immigrant communities who are also of color, many of whom are of African descent. So it's good stuff.
Right. And I'd also just add that, I switch hats sometimes, my NAACP hat on, but I think it's something that we can think about doing. Whenever we have events that require services, we seek out businesses that are owned by African Americans. So when we have a dinner that's catered, we have it catered by an African American owned restaurant. When we have to create a video, we have it done by a videographer who's African American. So it's not, it is in a sense, it's spending money, but it's also providing them with exposure that shows that they can, in fact, do great quality work, that shows that they're worth attention, and people of color can produce quality products and services. Betty, see your hand up.
Yes, Trinity in Hampton and Christ Church in Dover or in Portsmouth have a small social justice group. And one of the things that we've started doing recently is to publicize in the churches places where people can show up, like the BIPOC festival happening next Sunday. And like there's a film, or there's a theater, there's a play on Own a Judge that's being produced in the Portsmouth area, and also the general things that the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire is doing, because they do tea talks, they do poetry series, they They're sponsoring the Black New England Conference, which is actually going to be in Boston this year. So try to publicize those places where, one, you can show up, and this also helps educate yourself. And it also, if you show up, is a supportive, something you could do. So publicizing those in your parishes to get individuals to think about that and show up.
Other thoughts as to non-monetary efforts?
Well, thank you. I think those were great examples, and we just want to keep building on that. You know, that's because I think we have some people who really want to do something, but they're not sure what it is, and so to give examples and to be creative. Thank you.
So what help do you need in doing this work? What are the challenges you're facing that the province might be able to help with?
I mean, I think the thing that you mentioned about having a website that has resources on it and ideas on it that like the things we were just talking about, and so people can see those ideas and have a place to go for them.
Right.
I can say, hearing that, a thing I would need and support from this group on then is sort of potentially a working group or a few key volunteers interested in helping to assemble and collate that for publication. I think the best way for things of that nature to get done is that I have some volunteers working directly with me who keep me on, keep it at the top of my pile, and also sort of take on some of the work and have better connections across the whole of New England. So my ask out of that is, who wants to join in?
Carol's raising her hand to join in. Right, thank you, Carol. And we know that many people, we had 25 people sign up for this session, Will, and so there are 15, 16, I guess, if we know Arrington had to leave. We'd love to get more people at this next gathering that we have, and more people involved. So certainly spread the word that this network exists, and come to share. So what would be helpful as topics for next time we meet? We're thinking about meeting every quarter, so we're in September now. We probably, well, I don't know if we meet in December, we probably meet next in January. Because the holidays will be upon us. The Christian holidays, we're in Rosh Hashanah now. Tova, everyone. But what are the topics that would be helpful to you all for us to discuss next time we meet? Yes, Doug.
Well, how many dioceses are going to have a resolution at their fall conventions? Because just hearing back from that, what that was like and what the next steps are, I think that would really be helpful.
That's an interesting one. What happened from your diocesan resolutions? Or what is happening with them, and how are they being carried out?
Because I get a sense in New England, we're kind of at a tipping point with that now. I think things are really going to start to change based on that.
Okay. Betty.
How we might talk to our delegates to General Convention about the resolutions that you mentioned previously. How we can talk them up, ask them if they have any questions, things like that.
I discussed talk up our resolutions. Yeah, that'll be interesting because I don't know that we'll yet know, our delegates may not yet know which committee they're on, but if we can have a discussion about how we can talk with them once they're identified, I guess that might be valuable. Kathy, I see your hand up.
Hi, I'd like to hear about how people are inviting the larger community into this work. In other words, beyond the parish or the diocese. I serve 2 small parishes, and I just feel like that I'm having trouble bringing words to this, but that there are people out there in the community who want to be part of racial justice work, and that if they knew the church was involved in that they would want to be a part of it.
Okay. How do we go outside our walls, so to speak? Go out and that's a very, of course, challenging topic, because for many people in New Hampshire, we're the leading state of nuns. Don't want anything to do with the church. But in many cases, if people knew the church was doing this work, they might actually join us. So it's how are we advertising that we're doing this work, or making it known? I won't use the word advertising. That's not quite the right sentiment, but how do we make known that we are doing this work and we want people to join us in doing this work? Roberta, I think I saw your hand up. And you're on mute, Roberta.
So sorry. I think January is a good time for our own personal resolve to do things in the coming year that would help in this thing, and to share them at our January meeting.
So more resources, or what resources are available?
No, just personal resolutions that we think of that we can personally do.
What can we personally do? Okay, all right. So let me just see if I can clarify. And Bishop, I see your hand up, but I want to understand a little bit more about Roberta's suggestion. We've been talking a lot here about initiatives that we interpersonally can lead, or could propose for our parishes and our dioceses to lead. So I'm trying to better understand your question about what we can personally do.
We can resolve to get involved with the different committees and the work that's being done.
Okay. Thank you. I think I have a sense of that. Bishop.
And just to go to the financial dimension of, we call atonement or reparations, it seems to me as if most of the dioceses that are doing that in a significant way are really big dioceses, like Massachusetts or Long Island or New York or Maryland or Atlanta. And they did a study, and my diocese, it was 107 dioceses, and Western Massachusetts is 52nd. So we're not small, but we're in the middle. And I think Rhode Island and New Hampshire and Maine are probably pretty similar to that. So and I don't know if you have access to this information, James, but is there an example from some other part of the country where a middle-sized diocese has done something impactful just in the, say, the narrow notion of the financial type part of reparations?
All right, so examples: middle-sized diocese, death in the financial side of reparations. Okay, I have captured that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I actually looked at that. It's something we talked a lot about when we put forth our resolution, because we are one of those smaller dioceses. And we did not get the resolution crafted the way that I had kind of envisioned it would happen around what we would do with some moderate amount of money. Some of us had been putting forth that we would actually allocate $250,000, which not the 1.5 million that this larger diocese could put forth, but we identified that we wanted to give scholarships along the lines of what Georgetown University is doing. We identified that we wanted to fund scholarships at the college level and scholarships to other kinds of professional development. We wanted to provide some funding for organizations that are doing the work like BLM, like Black Heritage Trail. And we had some other components that were actually spending money to support, to walk alongside and support the groups that are already doing the work, because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel with the money. So hopefully when our task force completes, it will make the recommendation that that's what we spend, roughly $250,000, or some amount, in actually doing that work in a smart way. So hopefully by the time we meet, there will be some other dioceses that are of our size who've done that. In my investigation, I didn't see any dioceses that were smaller who really had actually even proposed any of this. So we kind of took what was being proposed and scaled it down to a smaller size. Others. I think this is enough topics for our next meeting, so we'll endeavor to include those in our next gathering. Well, thank you all so much for being here and sharing your thoughts and sharing what's going on in your diocese and what your challenges are, how you're dealing with the pushback. We have a little video for a closing prayer, a closing send-off from Bishop Desmond Tutu. So Will, you want to tee that up? I think you got the link.
We raise our hands and we say, we will be free! All of us!
When you thought, say, of a thing like apartheid, and you saw so many who seemed to be supporting the racist policies of the former government in South Africa, and you say, how are we going to change? Well, I always say to people, remember, the sea is actually made up of drops of water. That what you do where you are is of significance. It may just be that your act of courage encourages someone else who was slightly more apprehensive.
If you think you can stop us from becoming free, you are going to be stampeded. For until blacks are free, no one in this country is going to be free.
He was in New York City this morning when he heard the news that he had won the Nobel Peace Prize.
This award is saying that it recognizes that we in the South African Council of Churches are those who stand between South Africa and catastrophe.
I held on to non-violence in very large measure, I think, for strategic reasons. If we went the way of the armed struggle, that we probably would not stand too much of a chance against a government that was armed to the teeth. I did get to the point of saying, I am not a pacifist, but that I was a peace lover and a peace advocate.
Because of the conflict of the past, no matter on which side we stood, we all stand in need of healing.
The truth shocks, the truth traumatizes, and it's not easy. It's never easy to forgive. It's never easy to be reconciled. It's not cheap. You know, it cost God the death of his son.
I could say I have the right to retribution. When I forgive, I say I jettison that right, and I open the door of opportunity to you to make a new beginning.
When you show compassion, when you show caring, when you show love to others, do things for others in a wonderful way, you have a deep joy that you can get in no other way. You suddenly feel a warm glow in your heart because you have, in fact, wiped the tears from the eyes of another.
He loved. He laughed. He cried. He was forgiven. He forgave.
With that, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your Sunday, a wonderful week, and we'll see you out doing the work that we're called to do. Amen.